Hello, and welcome to Arts and Entertainment.
With Chris and Randall.
I'm Chris,
I'm Randall.
and welcome to the show. Today, we are doing something on stand up comedy, particularly the Netflix stand up comedies. We are not sponsored by Netflix, but this would be a great time for Netflix to sponsor us. I have been hearing a lot of my girlfriend's a stand up, and I'm a member of a lot of stand up groups because I'm a storyteller. In the last couple of years, I've really heard a lot in the stand up comedy circles about three groundbreaking comedy specials that just all happen to be on Netflix. Neal Brennan's Three Mics, Hannah Gadsby's Nanette, and the recently Emmy nominated Inside by Bo Burnham. In fact, I read it in one group chat. Is Bo Burnham and Hannah Gadsby creating a new genre of stand up specials? So I thought, hey, let's look at how these three particular people deconstruct the comedy special. But before we get into it, as always, I like to ask people, we want to know what you think of us. Are we doing a good job? What suggestions you have? So please subscribe, like, share, comment, write to us. What's the best way for people to reach to us, Randall?
I don't know if there is a best way, but check out our website, chrisandrandall.com. Also, our Facebook page, Arts and Entertainment with Chris and Randall.
Yeah, we really want to hear, if you have any suggestions for future shows or anything you think that we are doing really well, because we love to be complimented. If you think we suck, well, look, it won't be the first time someone did, so tell us. Maybe we'll suck less if you do. Uh, so, what was it going on here? So, I'm going to assume, like most of America or most of your listeners, you have Netflix. Uh, Back in 1975, Richard Pryor did a concert at Long Beach Civic Center. He filmed it. It was called Richard Pryor Live in Concert. It was released theatrically, and it's considered the first big comedy special. It's the first time that a stand-up comic went from doing like a 20-minute set or a 40-minute set to just doing a full long set, and not just doing it in the clubs, but getting it into the theaters. Have you ever seen the first Richard Pryor comedy concert?
Years ago.
Yeah, it was in theaters when I was a kid. I remember literally in theaters, you could just go and watch Richard Pryor. It was the coolest thing.
Did you go?
Oh yeah, hell yeah! And I loved him because he had done all these movies for kids, like The Silver Streak and Stir Crazy with Gene Wilder. And then, in the late 70s, HBO started airing comedy specials with Robert Klein and George Carlin. And then I guess in the early 80s, you started getting all these like stand-up specials.
Yeah, I just want to say, like, just for background, stand-up, it really starts, like, maybe in the 70s, like the early 70s,
Yeah.
it really starts, like the comedy clubs and all that, the whole thing. So, yeah, so by the time Richard Pryor does that special, it's like maybe only 10 years old or so, like the modern stand-up, how we think of
Oh,
it.
if that, yeah. And by the 80s, HBO is just like 80s and 90s, HBO, Comedy Central, the comedy special just becomes the thing, the 1 hour stuff. And then I guess at the beginning of the 20th century, around the end of the first decade, Netflix starts getting into the stand-up comedy special business. And Netflix, they threw a lot of money and they really went after HBO. And by the end of this past decade, I would argue Netflix really actually, I think, unseated HBO as as the place for stand-up specials. Look, you can see stand-up specials still on HBO. You can see them even on Amazon. But have you ever watched the stand-up on Amazon?
I don't know if I've ever watched one on Amazon.
For whatever reason, they're shorter shows. I've been told that a lot of times comics will just film themselves for a half hour and 40 minutes or 40 minutes or so and just sell directly to Netflix just to get publicity.
You
But
mean
Netflix,
Amazon? You did you misspoke?
Amazon,
Okay,
I
yeah. So
misspoke.
I believe Amazon. Almost anybody can get something on Amazon. I read about the process. I'm not exactly sure, but it's not difficult apparently.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Spotify of comedy specials, where if you got one, we'll take it. Uh, But like Netflix, I've read this article. I'm citing an article from the Hollywood Reporter from June of 2019, and this was pre-pandemic, 3 years ago. But I think it's still a fairly accurate assessment, which is Netflix pays comics anywhere from $50,000 to $20 million. That's a big range, by the way, for a single 1 hour special, with the most common price tag to be about $500,000. So that was in 2019. That's a good sum of money, wouldn't you say?
Yeah,
Uh,
the range is interesting. It really shows the stratification in the entertainment industry, though. Really.
and they say about half of Netflix's nearly 150 million subscribers. Now, I'm pretty sure, thanks to the pandemic, they have more than 150 million subscribers. But at the time, nearly half of all of their subscribers have watched at least one comedy special in the past year. Uh, this year, back in 2019, there was a 59% increase in the number of accounts that watched stand-up specials. I'm assuming it's gotten even bigger. They interviewed Barry Katz on this, who's a manager who covers people like Bill Bellamy, Jay Moore, and Whitney Cummings. And he says, while only a handful of comics are getting huge money for Netflix, most comedians, the special is the commercial for the business. So, when you go to comedy shows live, they will often cite, hey, this person's got a Netflix special. It's really like how you improve your business model, would you say?
Yeah, it's an advertisement. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's almost like some economic sense. Being a stand-up comic is something like being a musician.
yeah. So in that sense, the album for a musician sells the concert tickets.
Right. So they're trying to make all their money off of live shows, and everything else is just like an ad for the live show.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly. So
not for giant musicians, obviously, but like yeah, for like a workaday musician.
yeah, but even actually, in fairness, even like a band like the Eagles, which hasn't put out a new album in almost 35 years, they make their money on touring. So the road, these specials are for the road. So it we will list an article from the New York magazine, The Vulture, that lists links to about 10 really amazing Netflix comedy specials that were put out in that decade between 2010 and 2020. But there's a great interview with Whitney Cummings, who's not one of the people we're going to talk about, just from this past May with Nikki Swift. And I think she really sums up the contemporary world of stand-up comedy specials so well, because she says, it doesn't matter where your special is. It just has to be incredibly smart and incisive and take risks and be very personal. I had a robot in mind. I was so desperate to cut through the clutter. My last special had a robot that looked exactly like me. You have to start a conversation. I'm just trying to start a conversation about sex robots. And maybe this will be something that benefits women, because now that women are working, the thing we say all day is, I wish I had a double. More than ever, before, comedians needed to think outside the box. So having something unoriginal on Netflix is not necessarily better than having something super original on TikTok or YouTube or Instagram. We have to be smarter about what we do in specials now, Cummings explained. I mean, I think all about the specials that have come and gone that you don't even know are there. And that's a great point. Again, that was in the September, I'm sorry, that was in Nikki Swift, if you want to Google it. And that really is explaining that there's now so much content, even on Netflix, much less HBO. How do you stand out? How do you
Right. I sort of
rise
see
above the noise?
she's putting her finger on something that I think is true of the internet that wasn't true of other media, or mediums. Is so like TV, for instance, or theaters, especially. There was a limited amount of content, and that content was always controlled by major corporations. And that was good for certain creators, because you had a larger audience for a much smaller amount of content. But now you essentially have like an unlimited amount of content, and audiences get to choose any of it. So how do you stand out from like the cacophony? I mean, it's a strange time. I mean, it's an unusual time in human history for in terms of artistic creation, I would say.
Yeah, I agree.
So should we go? Should we go on? Let's talk about these specials, Chris. Right? Um,
Well, I mean, really, before we can talk about them, I guess the question is, we have to define our terms, right?
right.
Like,
So we have
what do I mean by like mainstream comedy special, right?
right.
Well, I'm
What do you
glad,
mean?
right? What do I mean, right? Like, what is, because if these guys are, I would say, deconstructing the comedy special, then what is the construction, right? So, uh, just this past in the last 2, 3 years, uh, on Netflix. I'll pick on Netflix this whole show. The Jerry Seinfeld, I think, was it last year, just put out. He was paid $20 million. Jerry Seinfeld is a very mainstream comic, wouldn't you say? Father of observational comedy. I mean, you can't really get more mainstream than Jerry Seinfeld.
Seinfeld is possibly the most mainstream comic, like working today. I don't know if there's another one that
Yeah,
could even.
everybody knows him. So the last special was at the Beacon Theater, which is a small New York venue, about 2,000 people, but it's still pretty big without being giant size. It's not like a stadium. It's indoors. He rented the Beacon Theater. There's an opening where he jumps out of a helicopter into the Hudson River. Half the show, first half of the show, he's just making observations. The second half of the show, he makes observations about his own life now that he's in his 60s and he's married and he's raising 3 kids.
But
So,
they're all like framed as jokes, right? With a setup and punchline. Is that correct, Chris? Would
well,
you say?
I would say that the traditional kind of show, it opens up with some one-liners, some opening jokes to get people just laughing, that type five that comics are talking about, to win the audience over. Maybe crowd work. Crowd work is one of the things Seinfeld does. Most comics do crowd work to just check in with the audience. You've seen it when they're talking to the audience. They talk to the audience, they make some jokes. Maybe they're topical. They'll talk about something that just happened in the news recently to get everybody kind of on board. And then as most specials now have a theme. So as the show evolves into the first half hour, you kind of get an idea of what their theme is. Look, all comics have a point of view, so their theme is just kind of a variation on it. They may introduce a couple of jokes that they're going to call back throughout the set. And then as the show progresses, maybe they'll tell longer jokes. Normally around the end, they tell like an anecdote or a longer story that kind of really connects with the title of the show, ends normally with a quick refrain to some kind of callback from before, and you're out between 50 minutes to an hour. Wouldn't you say that is the structure? If you watch Seinfeld, that is exactly what you get.
Yeah, I
But I
think
will say this, sorry.
I was just gonna say, yeah, I think that format you're describing, it really it evolved through the HBO specials. Like I know that the HBO
Absolutely.
specials, they love to have like some kind of video opening where they shot some kind of video sketch,
Oh, yeah.
and maybe even end with one. And what you're describing about the comics get a little more personal towards the end. I mean, a little bit long-winded. Yeah, I think that evolved in the HBO specials. I mean, it didn't.
Absolutely. That is definitely the ape show model. And, Mark Maron, who is the opposite of Jerry Seinfeld, he's what you call an alt comic. I went to a taping of his Netflix special, which you and I had seen a year earlier at the Dynasty Typewriter
Yeah, so
when
he
he
was
was
trialing that
working.
show at the Dynasty Typewriter here in
Now
LA, right?
yeah, so I saw the actual. I'm actually, if you look off the corner of your eye, you might hear me laugh or see my face. But I will say that between the year that he had done that 1 hour, 10-minute show, which would then become what is the name of it? It's the latest Mark Maron one about the apocalypse, I think.
I'll have to look it up.
Anyway, it hadn't changed that much between the time you saw it and I saw it, except it was a little tighter, a little more polished. But even Mark Maron, who is an alt comic, opens up some crowd work. Crowd work is followed by some topical stuff, followed by some general jokes on things that everybody in the audience, hey, everybody, we all date. Hey, everybody, we all have parents. Hey, everybody, it's the usual, hey, I'm like you kind of humor. And then in the second half, the stories become more personal. You learn about the things he's worrying about. And then he ends with this fairly long fantasy story involving the end of days, the apocalypse, and Mike Pence, if you remember it. So actually, that one goes from there's some personal work, and then he gets into what he's known for, which is really his political work and his hatred of certain kind of right-wing viewpoints and philosophies. And it's a very big, elaborate, what they call in stand-up an act out, where he's acting out stuff, which even Jerry Seinfeld does around the end. So it's a big story. He, again, refrains from earlier stories he's told, and then he gets out. And again, so whether you're an alt comic or you're the most mainstream comic, this is the paradigm. So I know, Randall, you filmed a mutual friend of ours, someone maybe you have not heard of because he's not at the Marin Seinfeld level yet, but our friend Jim Coughlin, who did put out a comedy album and a comedy special, you filmed that. So I'm assuming you were working within also the paradigm of a traditional stand-up show. Tell me, what was that like?
Okay, well, Jim, I've known for years, and he does a lot of stand-up, and he did a show at the Acme Theater in L.A., in North Hollywood, the Acme in North Hollywood, and they have like a great room for stand-up. It's like a traditional stand-up room with a brick wall and everything. And he wanted a recording made for a comedy album, he called it, that he would release on his website. And so I recorded it. I recorded the I did video. I used multiple cameras, but I also did the audio. I mean, I was the only crew for the most part. I mean, I think I enlisted one of his buddies to push the on-off button on one of the cameras.
Yeah.
So should I go on? Should I talk more about that, Chris?
Yeah, go about like you filmed it in a theater with an audience.
When I record stand-ups, and I've recorded many stand-ups, I like to try to mic the audience, and and of course the stand-up has a mic. I think a mistake that low-budget stand-up recordings make is they don't mic the audience. So a stand-up tells a joke, and then you don't get much of a reaction. It's very muted. So I like and by doing so, by miking the audience and the stand-up separately, you can also change the mix a little bit. You can normalize the volume on the audience. You can normalize the volume on the stand-up, and so you can bring the audience up to. I mean, I wouldn't say you make them laugh more than they did in real life, but you can bring them up to where you think they should be. Because I remember. Let me tell you, I recorded that special for Jim, and the audience loved it. I mean, the room was filled with people.
How many people you think were there?
I'm wondering that now. I think it could be around 100 people in that room. And
wow, that's a lot for somebody whose name not Jerry Seinfeld.
Well, there was a lot of people he knew. I mean, Jim's been doing stand-up for a lot of years, so he had a lot of actual fans and a lot of friends, and they loved it. I mean, I thought Jim did great. He knocked it out of the park. He was hilarious, and his fan base was they loved it. And so
actually, it just to quickly point out, his name is Jim Coughlin. Let's spell his name. Because you can go to his website to hear it, right?
Yes. Jim, Jim, Coughlin, Coughlin.
Do you remember the name of the album?
No, I don't. But I'll
think
link
it's also available on Spotify, right?
Yeah, I think it is. I'll link to it. I'll link to it.
Poor Jim has no idea that we're picking on him. But continue.
Yeah, I did, Jim. Well, so I just, I mixed it. I mixed it, and I like to normalize the volume levels, and I didn't spend a lot, with like a long show like that. It was just me. He's not paying a lot. I mean, I'm not going to spend months and months like sweetening it or anything.
Right,
so.
But it was a very, and I mean this is respect. Jim did the standard. What was it? An hour, slightly under an hour.
Jim is a very traditional stand-up. He just told a lot of setup punchline, and it was good, and that's how Jim is. He just likes to do like.
And he connects with his audience.
Yeah, I mean, his jokes have a definite point of view. I mean, he's a classic stand-up. His jokes have a definite point of view, and they're fun. He's just having fun.
He is. Look, I'll just say this much before we move on. Jim Coughlin is really funny. If you haven't heard Jim Coughlin, please listen. He is hysterically funny, and that he is working through the traditional format is because he's not so damn famous that he can afford otherwise. So I will say again, the article that gives you a list of a lot of different innovative uh, stand-ups that were on Netflix specials is September 5th, 2018 Vulture, which is a section in New York Magazine.
Okay. So Chris, to what degree do you think these Netflix comedy specials are familiar, and to what degree are they genre breaking?
Well, that is a great question. I do feel like yes, they're genre breaking, and why I chose these particular three versus, and there's so many. I get it. Like, why didn't you pick Maria Branford? Why didn't you like? There's a lot of great stuff. Don't get me wrong. First off, I didn't choose my favorite comics. I chose these because I have a girlfriend who's a stand-up. I hang out with a lot of stand-ups. I'm on a lot of the local Facebook chat groups for stand-ups, and I constantly find in the last several years the three most referenced comedy specials that people are so in awe that one person wrote the other day they should be their own genre are Hannah Gadsby's Nanette, Bo Burnham's Inside, and Neal Brennan's Three Mics. And you hear them over and over again, and I start to think to myself, not only are they the most name checked, but the three shows are all about mid-career comics. These are all mainstream comics who put out specials pretty much at the midpoint of their career, at least 10. When I say midpoint, I just mean they've been a known entity on the comedy scene world anywhere from 10 to 15 years. So they may have started even earlier, but at least as far as having an established persona, an established career, they've all at least been doing it anywhere from 10 to 15 years. And these three shows, I feel like what they're doing is they're deconstructing what a stand-up show is. Now, these three also happen to be people who also make their living as writers and directors, collaborators. You know, these are people. Neal Brennan has worked as a writer with Dave Chappelle. They worked on a number of projects together, including the Chappelle Show and Half Baked. You know, Bo Burnham directed the Chris Rock special. What was it called? The Tambourine. He also directed the movie Eighth Grade. He started at a very young age. He started 15. Hannah Gadsby not only has done a lot of work with, that TV show from Australia called Do You Like Me?
No, I don't know that one.
It's a big show from Australia. She worked with the comic who was the star of that, helping him. So these are comics who not only are comics, but they're comics who work with other comics. They direct other comics. They write other comics. They are very learned in the structure. So if they're going to break structure, it's a deliberate choice. Also, they all suffer from mental health issues, which I think is important in understanding it, because I feel like I will just state the theme right off the bat as opposed to this time reveal at the end, which is I believe what they're trying to do is they're trying to deconstruct the stand-up special to get to a deeper personal truth about their own lives. So let's look at those three specials, which we'll start out with. We'll do this in chronological order because I feel like that's how it should work. So let's look at Neal Brennan's Three Mics. That was made in 2017, based off actually of something he started on stage in 2015. Neal Brennan, again, as I said before, he started out as a writer on a lot of the MTV shows when he was in his early 20s, went to NYU Film School, dropped out. He ends up working with Dave Chappelle, writes Half Baked 4 years later. He's a writer on the Dave Chappelle Show. In the early 90s, he did a little bit of stand-up, but it wasn't until the Chappelle Show ended and he was 33 in the later part of the 90s that he gets back into stand-up, and he literally starts at the beginning, does open mics. So by the time that he did Three Mics, he's about 15 years into his career, well into his 30s. Actually, no, Um, he's into his, well, he's 47 now. So that was what? 2015 was how many years ago?
2015. It was like 6 years ago.
Right. So he's early 40s when he did this. And the premise behind Three Mics is there are three microphones. One microphone, he just tells one liners. Another microphone, he does just traditional stand up comedy. And the third microphone, which is dead set in the middle, so I guess technically the second microphone, he tells personal stories. Uh, and instead of doing like segues, that's what he does. So, what did you think about that particular structure of the show,
Yeah,
Randall?
so the structure, I think what he's doing is he's combining like a one person show and stand up, and by dividing it up amongst the mics, it helps the audience follow it because if he had stayed at one mic and didn't have any kind of division, you would wonder if he was joking or not. So the audience, they followed along perfectly. They knew when he was being serious, and they knew when he was going back to doing jokes, and that really helped. Yeah, I mean, and I don't know, in terms of oh, I guess you could say, I guess I would say about it is like, even with Nanette too, we'll talk about it. It's like a one person show with stand up as a hook almost.
Well, it's just very interesting because I would argue that, I mean, I'm a storyteller, so I certainly understand the personal storytelling element in a structural sense, and he is a writer, and it comes across very clearly, weirdly enough, in the one liners, which are very sharp and to the point, and in the personal stories, he's certainly very personal, but they have a great structure. But it is something that in a traditional stand-up show, the comic would seamlessly go from one-liners to doing a lot, open up with a bunch of one-liners, do some traditional stand-up jokes, and around the end of the show, get into the personal stories as we go deeper. Whereas here, he literally doesn't even do segues. There's no segues. It's just like, I don't know how it was done on stage, and I wish I had seen it. But when you watch the Netflix special, they just do blackouts. So he's at one mic, tells some one-liners, blackout. He's at another mic now. He's doing stand-up, blackout. Now he's telling a personal story, blackout. And there is no connectivity at all. Like, none of the jokes that he tells in stand-up really kind of relate to his personal stories. None of his one-liners relate. They are literally like three different elements, wouldn't you say?
Sure, yeah.
And it's interesting because it's not blended. So let's go a little bit further and just talk about, like, as a comment, now we're getting past the structure to the comment. What did you think about the social commentary he's making on the show?
I think there isn't. I'm gonna be honest. I don't think there's that much social commentary on this one. I think that this is very much this is very much a traditional one-person show where he talks about himself and his experience in life.
I do think there is social commentary. He talks about blacks and their lives. He talks about women. He talks about testosterone. He talks about toxic masculinity. But he really does. He's like, he has that whole thing about testosterone and how it brings all the worst.
Yes, true. But I think he makes a classic mistake, philosophically speaking, where he externalizes to the entire world his internal emotions.
How so? Go on.
Well, when he talks about, hey, okay, for instance, if he says, hey, you women just don't understand, guys, because we have this thing, testosterone, and blah, blah, blah. So just in that kind of phrasing, he's communicating that this is how men are different. And men are different because this is how he feels. This is not about, he's talking about himself and maybe his friends. He's not doing like to get all sciencey. He's not doing like a scientific analysis,
isn't that all that
human population?
Isn't that all that anyone can really do as an artist? Is just
as an artist, yes. But I'm just saying that it's personal. Art is personal. Art is inherently personal. It's not
Absolutely.
about the entire world. So you can listen to an artist, you can look at an artist's work, and you can say, oh yeah, I think that's true of many people, or you say, oh, you know what, I don't think that's true of many people. But whatever the case, whatever you think, the artist is talking about themselves. It's the artist is not a
No, and
sociologist.
but I think that you can cleanly divide all of these between what part of their show is social commentary and what part is personal revelation. Where are they keeping? Because the comic can put the focus first on society, normally at the beginning of the show, and then they put the focus on themselves as the show progresses to show you that they are not above judgment. And I would say when you just look, in fairness, I really feel like the social commentary is the mic that is the most stand up. You know what I'm saying? When he's speaking from the stand up mic, that is really when he's talking about, how college is a ripoff, right? Like he has that whole bit about when you're 18, really? You imagine if you were a business and you walk into a bank and like, yeah, I want you to give me, $500,000. And then for the next 4 years, I'm going to get blackout drunk and I'm going to major in sociology.
Yeah, well, that was interesting. I don't know. It's funny because a lot of his material is stand-up material. I don't know how much you want to get into this, Chris, but a lot of his stand-up material, it's very surfacey, which is what I think a lot of stand-ups do. It's like because college loans are stupid loans.
Yeah,
that's why the government subsidizes them.
Yeah,
that's why.
Right. So I like his left of center social criticism. The one-liners I thought were crazily absurd, almost Stephen Wright-like. If you remember the one-liners that he tells, they're funny, but they're kind of just all over the place.
Yeah. I mean, his comedy was interesting. I mean, do you remember anything in particular you want to talk about?
Well, I will say that because he has worked with a lot of black comics, he's pretty fearless about talking about the black experience.
Yes, I noticed that too. I was thinking, some people might take offense to say he crosses a line there. I mean, especially in today's modern climate. But the thing is like because of his format, when he goes back and he starts talking about himself, he talks about, all my friends are black. He because he's essentially using the old, I have a lot of black friends excuse.
Yeah. but he's not. I still think what he's like. You never see a depressed black man, or no, he doesn't say that. He said a black man is not allowed to be depressed in society, and I'm like, that's a pretty cool thing to say. You never think about it. So I feel like when you get to the middle mic, which is the storytelling revelation mic, that to me is where he holds all his personal revelation, where we learn he suffers from depression. We learn that he has issues with loneliness. He has difficulty in comedy. He has a great story around the end about his relationship to his father, which I don't want to spoil for anybody, but gives you more insight into his own trauma, his own depression. And basically, he's at his most vulnerable. And he is really like, he's just going into it in that, when he's telling those stories about, being in relationships that fail, being in school and failing, fear of failing, the relationship to his dad, how depression affects how people see him and how he sees himself. And I felt, and I look, as a storyteller, I know what he's doing, which is he is deliberately being so honest and so vulnerable, but he also holds back enough so that he's okay. You know what I'm saying? Where he's being honest with you. I saw an interview with him with Mike Birbiglia on Working It Out, where he said that when he structures his shows, because he's been in therapy a long time, one of the things that he takes from therapy is he likes to rat or tell on himself. So there are times in the revelation where it's not so much that he's confessing to you as much as ratting out himself, saying, you know what, I'll tell you the truth about me. I'm going to tell on myself. And in doing so, I think it brings the audience, wouldn't you say the relationship to the audience becomes a little bit more intimate?
Do you think that makes his jokes funnier after he goes on those asides and talks about himself?
Well, I think then there's the humor that comes from pathos and empathy. So, yeah, I think you're right. Your question to me, I guess, is, does the structure serve the content? Is that what you're asking?
Right. Okay, yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I think by not going, and that reminds me, or speaking of which would have been a more traditional way, that a comic goes from, hey, I just talked about why I don't like chicken or why rice-a-roni could also rhyme with rice-a-phony to, my dad does not love me. Whereas I feel like by breaking it out, Dave Chappelle was the one who told him, don't even tell anyone what the mics represent. Just go from one mic to another and let the audience figure it out for themselves. And Netflix, in their stupidity, then literally tells you what each mic represents. But I
did? I didn't notice that.
Yeah, stupid Netflix. But Chappelle was right. Or no, I'm sorry, that was Chris Rock. It was either Chris Rock or Dave Chappelle. He's friends with both, so I can't remember. No, it was Chris Rock who said, you should not do that. You just let the audience go. So, yeah, I feel like the structure does really well.
Do you think he inverts the stand-up special to a certain extent?
Yeah, don't you think so?
Well, I don't know. You tell me what you think.
Well, I just feel like, we're always taught with comedy that everything needs to be blended together so that there is never any pauses, there's never any breaks, so the audience can only follow your material. If one thing leads to another thing, there has to be some sort of unity, like a script. Like, hey, if we start out talking about going to the movies, then I have to talk about Milk Duds, and that's going to lead into my father taking me to the movies as a child, which is going to lead into how I became a fan of swashbuckling films, which will lead into a story about the day my dad left me at the movie theater. And that kind of needing to craft it like a script, which I would argue certainly he's capable of doing. The idea to say, no, I'm going to have those negative spaces where you're just going to hear something, stop, think, and do. I think it serves what he's trying to do very well.
Well, what is he trying to do? What's the result of this show, do you think?
Well, I think the net result is that, and you, I think when the show's over, I would say that that's the weakest part. You laugh at the one-liners and he ends on the one-liners, and I feel like the one-liners keep the show from ever getting too depressing, and it makes you realize he's inherently a happy person. I feel like the traditional stand-up stuff shows you that he knows how to be a funny man and is a funny man. But for me, the great takeaway really was the personal stuff and how behind all of this craft, all this intelligence, and all this perceptivity is a man who is doing his best to do his best while still dealing with the difficulties and insecurities. And so to me, it's very vulnerable, very human. And in a weird way, because he separates those three, for me, the net result is they all connect. Once it's over, it's my job to go, how does the one-liners and the stand-up connect to these stories about his revelations? And I like that there's enough open space for me to tie it up at the end. That's what the net result is. Now, an interesting thing that comes right after that one, a year later, is Nanette, which is Hannah Gadsby. You saw this one. How does Hannah Gadsby? What is the structure of Nanette?
Well, Hannah Gadsby starts out this show. It's supposed to be a stand-up show. I mean, she's selling it as a stand-up show, but then she starts the show and starts doing jokes. And then she says she's quitting stand-up, and she starts going off on a tangent, and she starts talking about. She starts getting personal. I mean, she's not telling jokes anymore at certain points. I mean, every now and then she'll tell a joke, but it's an interesting show because she is. She does stop being a stand-up, and she starts. Some people have derisively called it a TED Talk, but she does stop doing stand-up, and she starts talking about stand-up and about the stand-up she used to do. And one of the points I think she's making, and one of the most interesting things she's saying in this show is that when you're in a minority group and you're working in entertainment, you're trying to make content for a large audience, and she is sick of that. She doesn't want to. She says she's a lesbian woman, and she's tired of being self-deprecating and making fun of herself for the entertainment of a mainstream audience that doesn't like gay women, lesbian women. So I mean, so it's so yeah. What do you think, Chris?
Well, I mean, I just like I think that you're really making some excellent points, which is that she is almost Brechtian, in that Brecht would tell people in his theater what will happen in this is the scene in which the following things will happen, because he wanted to create an alienation effect, a period, a space for you to think about what's to come. So she talks about how punchlines and setups work, how tension in an audience works. She tells them, you're watching a comedy show, and I am doing this if I was a traditional comic by giving you setup, by giving you punchline, by creating tension, and then you give release. And she is literally more than even, I would argue, Neal, just really letting it out. Like, this is what here is your expectations of what you want this evening. Now, it's filmed at the Sydney Opera House, which is humongous. It's definitely the biggest venue compared to wherever the hell Neal Brennan filmed. But you also, I think, don't see the audience for some weird reason. They seem further away. How do you think? What do you think about the choices she makes in her material? You kind of alluded to it already.
Well, like I already said, she's trying to find a space. You know, she's asking the question, like, can she work in entertainment and be herself, and not have to self-deprecate, not have to hide her true feelings about I don't know, straight men, white men, straight people, whoever's not like her, I suppose. You know, and I guess we were talking about this before the show, right, Chris? The Long Tail. Who wrote that?
Yeah.
From Wired?
Chris Anderson.
So Chris Anderson,
editor of the Wired.
As the years have passed, I'm starting to think that his book and his theory about the long tail aren't true. But, you know, the idea behind the long tail is that in a post-mass media age, artists can create content for much smaller audiences. And so more artists can create more content for smaller audiences. You don't have to make mass entertainment all the time anymore. And so Gadsby is kind of trying to get there, I think. She's trying to create an entertainment for a smaller audience. And she's
So
saying,
how does that inform?
she's saying F you to the general audience.
So, right, because she starts the show kind of like, hey, I'm Ellen DeGeneres. I'm going to talk about being
Right.
gay. I'm going to make jokes about being gay. I'm going to make jokes about the fact that I look like a guy. And it's a very traditional setup of what like Aaliyah Deliria might do, who is also kind of a gay person who has sometimes that gender ambiguity in their appearance, and is very crowd pleasingly. And then she does really, I would argue, right into the second act where she lifts the mask is really when she gets into the social commentary. So I know you've really said this before, but it definitely seems like traditionally there is a rapport with the audience. But in this point, I really feel like her social commentary, which starts out like, oh, I named this Nanette because I was dating a girl named Nanette, but now I have no jokes about it, which is like, you know, a little social commentary. Or being gay is like blah blah blah, and then the social commentary really, would you say, is more about how society is not friendly to me, how I am not like you, the audience.
You know, I don't know if I'd call it social commentary. Like, going back to what I was talking about, yeah, I think I would call it...
I just mean there's a difference between her talking about her own life and talking in general about how women are treated in our society, how lesbians are treated in our society. That's what I mean by the social commentary, when she's not talking about her own
Sure, you know, she does talk about her personal experience a lot.
Right, we'll get to that in a moment. I just want to separate those two, because all of these shows are kind of divided into both, as comics always do. They put the lens on society, and then they put the lens on themselves. So when she's putting the lens on society and the way men treat women, the way lesbians are treated, the way power works in our society, to me, it's not that different from Neal Brennan. She's once again talking about various forms of oppression.
Well, she does make a point. She does make a point wrapped up in what I was talking about before. Even she does make a point about diversity. You know, I so we've been around entertainment for a while, Chris, right?
Yeah.
And it seems like there are two camps when it comes to the diversity issue, right? There's a camp that says, um, funny is funny, right? Have you heard this
Right.
before? Have you heard anybody say that?
Yeah.
And then I don't think I'm in that camp, because even if you get let's say you do a sketch comedy show, right?
Yeah.
And you say, oh, I'm going to have submissions for sketches, and then I'm going to
Right.
pick the funniest sketches. Even if you do that, you're going to get, even if you do that, if you pick a bunch of sketches that are all from the same kind of people, you're going to have a very one note show. You're going to have not that interesting show, because you're having all these sketches from the same perspective. Whereas you're literally missing an opportunity to diversify, and have more voices from different kinds of people, and I think that's kind of the point she's making in this show. She is trying to bring a marginalized minority voice into a stand-up sphere, and she's being unapologetic about it.
Right.
Because
And
one
she's
thing,
challenging viewpoints, right? She has this brilliant part about Van Gogh. Remember that?
yes,
And how we make these kinds of, we treat genius and craziness in some sort of beautiful way. She went to college, she had a degree in art curatorship. And when she goes into the real truth about Van Gogh, it's just freaking brilliant, isn't it?
she takes down Van Gogh.
And she takes down Van Gogh in a way that really challenges, why do we give Van Gogh, I never, you can never tell a joke the way the humorist has told the joke, but what would you say talking around it is so brilliant about that Van Gogh
Well,
take?
I don't know if I agree with her on her points about Van Gogh, but she does make the point, which is, it's funny. What she made this in 2018, and I'm sure she was conceiving of it earlier than that, but she's very much on the cusp of a discussion we're having today about an artist's work versus their personal life.
Right.
And it's an interesting discussion to have. There was a time in the school of postmodernism where the idea was you were going to separate an artist from their content, and no one ever did that. Not really. No audience has ever done that. It's a lot of things postmodern theory predicted came true, but that one never came true. Like, no one's ever separated the artist from their content, and she is, I don't know if you could call her an anti-postmodernist, but
I think you can, because look at the way so she does something in here, which is very deconstructive, very postmodernist, which is she tells a traditional joke about how she hits on a girl and a guy thinks because she looks like a man, or she appears that way, or whatever you want to say. I want to be clear that I'm not condoning, my point is only that she has she presents herself in a way that we traditionally associate with men, which is short cropped hair and a suit. So it was a certain gender. And I apologize. Someone's going to write me a nasty letter and say you're really being rude. And I apologize, because I don't have the language to serve what I am trying to say. But all I'm trying to say is her choice of attire convinces this guy that another guy is trying to hit on his girlfriend, but when upon closer inspection he realizes it's a lesbian woman, and that is a woman, he's like, no, that's totally fine and cool. And that's like the standard jokey joke. And then 30 minutes later or 20 minutes later, it's pretty long how long she waits, she tells the real story behind the joke, because most jokes are built on a real story, and the real story was the guy comes back and realizes, well, if you're a lesbian and you dress like a man, and I can't hit a woman. Originally, the punchline was, I can't hit a woman, but you don't count as a woman. And then he goes and proceeds to beat the crap out of her. And now that what we had laughed at a half hour ago is just heinous. So what do you think about the way that she approaches the personal revelations about her life in this show?
Well, that's another brilliant move on her part. She starts out with the joke, and everybody thinks it's a good, funny joke, and then she talks about the story that inspired the joke which the joke marginalizes her experience, right? And she's written it
Right.
specifically for a general audience, so they can enjoy just the fraction of her experience. You know, just they can enjoy her a tiny fraction of her life. The funny part of it, I guess you could say, the amusing part of it. And then when she tells the actual experience, now she's letting you in onto her full experience, her world. You know what it's really like to be her and to be a marginalized person. And so so that's part of what she's doing in the special. I think that's why the special, that's one of the, that's yet another reason why this special was so influential. Or I don't know, I don't know if
I
it's
mean, there's a
influential.
lot she reveals. She reveals that she suffers from ADHD. She talks about being a survivor of sexual incest and assault. And would you say that she draws further and further away from, trying to please the audience, trying to
Yeah, definitely. That's something
inform
else.
the audience? I would almost argue as a man and say what you want to say. I almost felt like she's attacking the audience.
Yes, definitely.
Which
I would.
is her right to do so as an artist. Don't get me wrong. I don't like, oh, Chris, you just don't like her because you're part of the misogyny problem. Maybe so. But I'm just saying that is an interesting way of sharing your pain, is by both being honest and vulnerable, but also being angry towards people in the audience.
Well, I think she's trying to express her true feelings regarding these things that happened to her, and it's sincerity.
And you can see the rage, you
Well,
can
yeah.
see the pain, you can see the hurt.
Right.
And I almost didn't know if she was going to be okay. Unlike Neal Brennan, who has the problem of being depressed, and as he states, it's hard for me. For sometimes he comes across, maybe as he would say, emotionally neutral. For her, because she doesn't suffer from depression, but other issues, she comes off white hot, and so much more than you never, in traditional stand-up, the comic never turns on the audience. They just never do. Maybe they'll cite one or two people like a heckler or people who were of the opposite political opinion, but she just wouldn't go at, like, she just, not only did she go after men, but she even said women too are close to the power and the problem. She understands that in a room full of, either she's in a room full of men or she's in a room full of heterosexuals, but she's in a room full of people who are judging her in such a manner that she feels is oppressive. I'm just saying it's an interesting choice. Do you feel this kind of two-part structure of starting out in a very general stand-up way and then turning the tables? I really want to say she's turning the tables on the audience. Do you think that structure serves the content?
I liked that there wasn't a lot of division between the jokes and the more serious stuff. I don't know. I think the three mics, it's like a little bit. It was a little bit. I mean, it works for three mics, but I mean, I don't know. I liked how Gadsby was. You didn't know where she was going half the time. Like every now and then, she would be talking about something very serious, and then she'd throw a joke in there. And I like that. I mean, it's just because that's really more of a full human experience. It's like she can see the humor in painful things that happen to her, and it humanizes her more, because, when Brennan in Three Mics tells
We'll
a horrible...
get to the comparison later. I don't want to get too far, but go ahead.
Okay, yeah. When Brennan in Three Mics talks about, how something horrible happened to him and there's no laughs, and then he goes and does jokes about it, it's like, it just feels a little disconnected. But this one, she's created like a whole, she's a whole person, and that's what she's trying to do. She's trying to take her marginalized voice and present it as a whole person to a general audience, I think.
I definitely would like. I promise when we get to the end of the conversation, we'll compare all three. For me, it's the opposite, because I felt just that there was no room for me to feel. She's coming in and she's feeling up all of her emotions, and I'll just say Brennan at least gave me the space to feel what I want to feel. Whereas here, as an audience member, I just totally felt attacked. Now, that said, I respect the fact that she's constantly peppering her revelations like a proper stand-up with a lot of humor and a lot of jokes. So it doesn't really feel entirely like a TED talk because she never forgets that she's also doing a comedy. And if because it is still a comedy right up to the bitter end, and I really mean bitter end, uh, how do you feel like she's inverting the stand-up comedy special? I know we kind of said it already, but
Well, I do. I just want to say, I don't think stand-up's going after the audience is that unusual. I really do enjoy a stand-up that'll go after the audience every now and then. How does she invert it? Well,
well, I mean, I
obviously
agree
she's
with
getting.
you that way. I mean, Eddie Murphy used to dare his audience to say, the white audience, to say at the top of their lungs just to make them uncomfortable. But no, I honestly think she really does not like certain people in the audience, and that's a large portion. She's deliberately creating tension in the audience. So the tension that you're feeling, I'm not making that tension. That's what you're feeling, and the tension, she would argue, is really their own shame.
Well, maybe. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe. I mean, I like it though. Let's see. So how is it inverted?
Well, yeah. How is it inverted?
Well, I mean, obviously she's not doing setup punchline all the time. I don't know if inverted is the best word, but she's definitely
Okay.
like
Well,
trying to expand. I would say
I
she's
mean,
trying to expand stand up.
yeah. I mean, I would say that she is taking all the techniques of a stand-up show. I don't think it's a TED talk. I don't think it's a motivational speech. I think at no point in the presentation does she not realize that she has a ability as a stand-up comic to wield her humor. I just feel that she's doing it in a way that is the most adversarial to an audience. Does she make it work? Obviously, because people like it.
Well, I will say.
So what do you think is the net result?
Yeah, the net result. Like I already said it. I already said it. She's trying to elevate a marginal voice to a general audience in such a way that it can have full expression, and I think she achieves that. She achieves that. So yeah, it's a good result.
Okay. So the third one, and this is the most recent, is called Inside. It's by Bo Burnham. Just came out, 2021, Emmy nominated, by the way. For those of you who don't know Bo Burnham, he's had a really interesting life. He started at 15. He just turned 30. So he's been doing it for 15 years. He was the youngest person to ever sign a contract for a comedy album for Comedy Central. He put one out at 17. He used to do these YouTube videos. He was, how do I explain? Do you remember about at the beginning of the 21st century, really, like when there was just a lot of funny songs and funny videos by young guys, that were just, he would.
Yeah, Bo Burnham is a good-looking young guy that has a certain kind of fan base, and I mean.
But when he started out, he was in that era where we had Tosh. He was in that area where it Cranker Yankers. He was. I'm trying to figure out. Well, today we'd say he was problematic. Songs about gays, racist women. But
well, I don't know that much
young
about
and scatolog. Oh, so he was young and scatological, and he was irreverent for the sake of being irreverent. And he was riding a crest of early social media, kind of Gen Z, whatever generation he's in. But he was just cresting on youth. He was a young bad boy with a lot of funny songs and very cool videos. And he elevated himself. He actually did a great movie that just came out a few years ago called Eighth Grade.
I started watching that. It's not too bad.
He's good, and
I don't think I've gotten through it all the way.
He directed Chris Rock's Tambourine. Did you ever see that one? Which is a great.
I haven't seen Tambourine yet.
Very straightforward, though. Very straightforward. Traditional. It's good, and it has a lot of heat and meaning. But it's one of Rock's best ones. Many people quote. Actually, a lot of comics do talk about Tambourine a lot. And in fairness, I'm not mentioning doing a thing on Tambourine. It's not here because I think that Chris Rock is always pushing the edge, but always working within the paradigm, whereas Burnham is not. So Burnham stops doing comedy about 5 years ago. He just stops performing live. And then in the beginning of 2020, he goes back to doing stand-up. And no sooner does he go back to doing stand-up than the pandemic happens, and then forget it. There's no more clubs. So he takes upon himself in his guest house to just put together his own comedy special. He edits it, films it, writes his own material, performs it. It's just him inside. He never leaves, as we're all inside during the pandemic. And there's no audience. It's almost shot like a real-time documentary. He doesn't know as he's filming it when it's going to end. And he does songs. And again, he too has become a little bit aware of the toxicity, as you might say, of his material in his youth, or he is looking back upon these things. And anyway, I don't want to give too much away. It's very funny. I liked it. I like the songs. I like the sketches. And he is alone. So, Randall, this is a hard one, and because you have a much stronger background in film. How would you even explain the structure?
Well, I would say Bo Burnham is like he's a musical comedian like Weird Al Yankovic. He's like a much better looking Weird Al. The structure is just it's mostly a bunch of like funny songs that Bo did. I mean, sometimes to Burnham's credit, he doesn't either the songs are really short or he doesn't play the whole song. And each song, has its own like little visual representation that's suitable to the song, that's appropriate to the song. I mean, he has an apology song where he superimposes a cross on top of himself, just made of light. Which,
but it's not all song. It's not all song. I mean,
he does
proper
some
sketches. He has proper sketches.
He does
himself.
some talking. He does some talking. I think there's a lot of songs.
Well, there's a lot of songs, but there's sketches where he's just literally inverting himself, where he does a comment on something he just did, and then he shows that comment and comments on that comment, and then that comment and that comment until he inverts himself. He treats his life in lockdown as if it was a video game that he could play. And in between all of these different sketches, whether he is singing or talking or communicating with his mom on FaceTime, though we never see his mom, you also watch him trying to film himself, edit himself, and talk about his feelings of loneliness and isolation. He is suicidal. He has suicidal thoughts. I can only hope and assume he is getting treatment, but he talks a lot about, again, the third person in a row now to talk about their mental health struggles. And we're watching, he thought it would take 6 months. He thought it would be done before he was 30. And time is still going, and it's not even clear, is he working on this because he isn't fully happy with what he's made? Or is he working on it because he can't leave the house? I mean, yeah, we've already kind of said this, but let's just look at the content for a moment. And what do you think about the social commentary, the aspects, the things he's saying about society and how we live?
Well, I think he's mostly, I don't know, he does one song about the internet, how the internet is he's trying to satirize the internet, which is not a bad piece of material there.
But he also includes himself in that, I mean, he isn't above it.
Sure.
There's that, I mean, like, for example, there's a really funny bit on a good song about white women on Instagram.
Oh yeah, white women on Instagram. I mean, I don't know. Can I just say something negative about Bo Burnham?
You go right ahead, because I didn't get to say enough negative things about Hannah Gadsby. Go. I said too many, probably.
Well, I mean, I just think I don't find Bo Burnham funny, and I haven't seen much Bo Burnham before this, and I think he does a lot of low-hanging fruit. I mean, White Woman Instagram, the title of the song, and then it's just a list of like typical things like so-called white women post on Instagram. I think it's lazy and very easy, I think. And I think a lot of his humor is like that. It's not particularly complex. It's not particularly clever. I mean, I was a big fan of Weird Al back in the day.
Okay, now Okay, go ahead. I was going to
And
argue with you. No, let me argue with you first.
go
So
ahead.
no, I think you're completely wrong. I even know women who like white women on Instagram. And the point of white women on Instagram is how privileged white people are. White women in particular tend to have more time on Instagram. White men tend to be otherwise. And I think his criticism of that late stage capitalism, the way he goes after branding and marketing, I think he is, like the other two, just very left of center. And I honestly think, to me, some of the funniest parts is how critical, and actually compared to even Neal Brennan, for me, I think his criticisms of white privilege, of toxicity, of late stage capitalism, I think they're far more pointed and far more. Actually, strangely enough, Bo Burnham would be the one you like the most. I had a discussion with someone else, and I thought, you know what? I bet Randall's not going to love Hannah Gadsby, but he's going to love Bo Burnham, which proves I really don't know you at all. But now we'll
I
talk
was
about.
surprised I liked Gadsby's show as much as I did. I'll tell you the truth.
Well, it speaks highly of you and speaks not highly of me. So okay, so sure, let's get into yeah. While we're in social commentary, because that's the Weird Al, go for it.
Well, I just want to say I was, of course, like a lot of kids my age. I was born in '75. I was a huge Weird Al Yankovic fan. Weird Al was like a god to us when we were kids, and Weird Al did a lot of the same stuff. And Bo Burnham even sounds like Weird Al, which is weird. He sounds a lot like Weird Al, and I think Weird Al's music was actually better. But okay, but that's a different subject. But yeah, Weird Al songs I remember being much cleverer. Like, one thing that I remember Weird Al songs doing was making fun of that genre of song. So, for instance, Weird Al would write a love song that kind of made fun of love songs, Burnham is writing songs. Okay, Burnham is doing the lazy thing I think that a lot of musical comics do, which is why I don't like most musical comics. Most musical comics, what they do is they write really bad jokes and then they sing them. And I think that's what Burnham does, essentially. And I don't know. I don't know. I wish I could get into it. You know what I think, though? That Burnham, like, give him another 10 years, he'll probably be a lot better.
Well, I'll say this, because I was born in '65, so I remember in 1979 when an 18-year-old Weird Al Yankovic from Van Nuys recorded in his bathroom "My Bologna." So I would say that Burnham is very much like Weird Al. They both started out as teenagers. They both started out doing parody songs. I have been to a Weird Al Yankovic show. I caught him at the Hollywood Bowl, which uses mixed media and costumes and props and everything. And I will say that a Weird Al Yankovic concert completely is there's no comparison. I find Mark Russell or Tom Lehrer, they're funny, but they're just standing at a piano just going la 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 la. But a Weird Al Yankovic concert, if he ever does one again, oh my God, he's amazing. And no, I'm not going to say that anything on a musical level, no. And Tom Lehrer is really the antecedent of Bo Burnham, anyhow, who admits to being influenced because Lehrer was the great social critic. But I do think that his social commentary is very astute and very on point. Now, the personal revelation elements of this stuff, which comes in his apologizing, which comes in his breakdowns, how did you feel about the personal stuff and how he goes about that?
Can I be honest, Chris? I mean,
No, you can only be dishonest, Randall.
oh, that's too bad. So I can't say anything. Okay,
No,
I'll be honest. I'll be honest.
This time and only this time, you be honest.
He
Otherwise, I want you to lie.
This guy Burnham comes across as like a giant narcissist to me. I mean, and I know that probably most stand-ups tend to that, but I mean, Burnham is just. He's very much all about Burnham, and he loves the attention, and he even says it. I mean, he makes jokes about it. I don't know. It leaves me cold.
Leaves you cold. I will say that it seems to me that the personal revelation is very masked when it's in the songs because he is addressing himself and his history, and I think it helps if you know a lot about Bo Burnham coming in. But then there are the elements of him filming himself looking like he is falling apart. And this is where it gets a little weird because I would argue, look, he's a man trapped inside a small guest house over the year and a half trying to document himself and make you laugh. But in truth, He lives in a big apartment. That's his guest house on his property. He's married to the woman who directs Hustlers. He's in a happy
Ugh.
relationship. He goes home. Now, he doesn't shave. That's true. You get to watch his beard grow. But in truth, I wonder if it's more that he's created a character or persona of Bo Burnham, and the character of Bo Burnham is the one who's having the nervous breakdown, not the real Bo Burnham. And he's telling a story about a man trying to put a comedy show together, which is kind of weird. It's almost the plot of a Weird Al Yankovic movie from the early 90s. You know, is he just a guy all by him? So is this really the real Bo Burnham, or is this a character named Bo Burnham? And it's not entirely sure, which is why I have to ask you, and I know what you're going to say. Does the structure serve the content?
Well, what's the structure of this? The
structure is in the absence of an audience, in the absence of performing live. He is either talking to the camera, which is you, the viewer, watching the special, or he's talking to the camera so that you can later on see that he's really just keeping an interior monologue with himself. So, and then he goes back and forth. So the audience is either a man having a conversation with himself, or a man keeping a video diary in the midst of a pandemic, trying to amuse you, the viewer, who may or may not be here or may not be someplace in the future.
Okay, well, I'll just say that
he even does a bit where he twice he adds a laugh track, and he pretends once to be performing outside for a group of people when he's not. Just like there's a point where he's telling a song and he hits a button to make people laugh, so that you become very aware of the artificiality of live performance, which again, I think there's a lot of negative space, meaning there's a lot of space for you to go, am I supposed to laugh right now? Or am I supposed to be aware of the amount of chicanery that a comic uses in doing a stand-up special?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that to me, that's
Burnham, why I feel it's kind of inverted. Do you feel that he's inverting in that way?
Well, I'll just say that Burnham, he's good at video production. I mean, he knows what he's doing. He knows how to communicate with video. Yeah, I mean, the guy, he knows what he's doing. I mean, he has the skills. He has a certain set of skills, Chris.
So he's inverting. I mean, and I would say it is not like watching a Weird Al Yankovic special, because clearly there's a man who's struggling in between your laughter as you do this. So that while there's comedy going on, there's clearly also a lot of pain, which is, again, what inverts. So for me, I'd say, what do you think? If it left you cold, then I guess the net result for you, and please tell me otherwise, is it didn't work for you.
Well, you already said, Chris, that you didn't know if he was playing a character or not. So that's exactly my feeling. I mean, that's why it leaves me cold, because I feel like, everything Burnham's doing is just for attention. I just feel like he is, he's a tip. I don't know what to say. He's a typical YouTube personality. He just does everything for attention. And if he has any real feelings, we'll never know what they are.
Well, I mean, it seems a lot of people I've spoken to, it does affect them emotionally. It does tap into their own feelings of loneliness and isolation. I would say for me, it went on too long. It's the longest of the three specials. It goes on for almost an hour and a half. It's good, but I would honestly say, if you're going to watch it, take a break and watch it in two parts, because there's no reason you need to sit through it in its entirety. It almost feels at times interchangeable, but I did feel that I had felt, even if it was a work of fiction, I still felt something for the character of Bo Burnham and how there is a lot of pain. And I'll say this, I mean, what I think is similar about all three of these people, outside of the fact that both Bo Burnham and Neal Brennan both dropped out of NYU during their first year of college, is that, and besides the fact that they all suffer from mental health issues, is that I think it's fair to say they're all taking apart the form, which they know very well professionally, because they're in so much pain personally that it's like pulling a bandage out. I feel on some level, it's either, and then if you don't agree with me, just say so, but I feel like their goal is to not only show the audience the pain they're in, but to also discover the pain they're in.
Yeah, I think that's well said, Chris. I mean, I don't know if Burnham's being serious in this special, but if he is, then you're totally right. But what do you think's different about these three?
Well, I think they're while they may all go about deconstructing and they're all in the search for a higher truth, I think their relationships to their audiences are very different. In that I feel that Neal Brennan has the most traditional relationship as a stand-up. He's just, hey guys, I'm going to perform a show. You're in the audience. We'll have a rapport, and plays off of that energy. I think that Hannah Gadsby builds tension and makes her audience uncomfortable. And I think Burnham has created an imaginary audience, which in and of itself means that the audience is not you, and is the audience the viewer, or is the audience an imaginary character? Now, in truth, whenever you watch a comedy special that's filmed in front of a live audience, that audience is not the viewing audience that's watching it on TV. That is a third character. And we tend to look to the audience on a comedy special for instructions on when to laugh. Here, by the way, is the really amazing thing I discovered by sitting in on that Mark Maron taping.
What?
They sweetened the audience, because when I saw Mark Maron perform, he had okay laughs, but when I watched it on Netflix, it was insane laughs.
Okay, well, Chris, I just want to say that as somebody who works in video production, I've known they've sweetened the audiences for these stand-up shows for years and years. And I just want to say, Jim Coughlin's show, I did not sweeten the audience whatsoever. That is the actual
Excellent.
Response he got. If you listen to that show.
I worked Ronnie Chang's Netflix special, and I tell you, they did not need to sweeten that audience. The jokes, it was like a laugh bomb. Every 10 seconds, the entire Alex Theater in Glendale exploded. So I'm not saying this is always the case, but yes, I think that is something to be said. So that's different. Obviously, their own ages, background, sensibilities are different. I prefer Neal Brennan because I feel that Neal Brennan gives me the space to feel what I want to feel. I like that it's not a blended show. What do you think is different about these three?
Well, I mean, Bo Burnham's isn't even a stand-up show. I mean, so that's obviously different.
It is a stand-up special, and that's the key. It's
It
just
is?
not. Oh, it is. That's why I brought it. Otherwise, there would be no point. I've wasted the audience's time. So thank you, Randall. No, that is a stand-up special. It airs. A stand-up special, to be clear, on Netflix does not have to be a man or a woman in front of a live audience. It's just got to be stand-up in front of a camera. That's really all it ever has to be. So
Okay,
it is a
well,
stand-up special.
Other than that, I think I've already talked about the differences extensively.
Well, but
So
what was your favorite of the three?
You know, I already told you, like, I think that the Gadsby one was my favorite. And I'm really surprised because I really, just reading about it, then I fell asleep watching it the first time because I was expecting like a straight stand-up show. I was very tired and I fell asleep. But no, I mean, I thought it was like by far the best one. I mean,
And how
you
did you feel about Neal Brennan, which was my favorite?
It was entertaining. It was entertaining. I mean, I don't know. It's like I feel like Brennan is trying, and also like Brennan and Bo Burnham, they're trying to make us feel this sympathy for them, but they're both very successful people. So I mean, it's hard for me to get into that headspace. I mean,
Well, but I mean, I will say that they both own it, and they both are willing to go after themselves for it. That's not new. Eddie Murphy does that in Raw. I'm just saying
a little bit.
that they both do it. I definitely feel like Neal Brennan was the best. I think Bo Burnham and you and I liked him more than you did. So either collectively or individually, would you say that any of these pieces have elevated the form of the stand-up comedy special?
Well, I guess that's to be determined. But let me ask you: have you seen the influence of these shows in the entertainment world?
I hear a lot of comics reference it. And
Okay.
if you do look at that article with the links to the Netflix shows that have come after and during that period, you will see that. And then just that Whitney Cummings quote that, yeah, every comic right now is really pushing. And I think that if you look at the way comedy used to be in our youth, which is mostly observational comedy, and then observational comedy, and then political comedy, and social commentary comedy. And now that Trump's no longer president, you can't just do jokes about Trump. I think we've entered a new stage of comedy. And I think I know this because I do produce a lot of storytelling shows, and I will get comics, I'll book comics. And I think what you're beginning to see in the world of comedy and storytelling is a merging of the two. And I think a lot of comics now, more than ever, are trying to be confessional and revelatory and realize that that instead of trying to be the smiling clown who underneath the mask has tears, I such a cliche, better. Sorry. They're really trying to get to the pain and truth of their own lives, whatever it is they feel. And there's an inherent trust that they will have with the audience that as long as they are being honest with you, and maybe this is why you didn't like Bo Burnham, as long as they're being honest with you, whatever they present to you is going to register with you. Whereas the artificiality of punchline setup is no longer needed. Just like observational for the sake of observational is no longer needed. Everybody hates Trump. How many freaking jokes can you ever tell? But this said, I have been to so many stand-up shows in the last month, and all of them have had a lot of the tropey tropes of comedy. So my feeling is, as we start this new decade and as we start to slowly come out of our shells and go back to the clubs and recording, it'll be really interesting to see whether or not the permanent contributions of these three people will force comics to take more risks, to bend the rules, and just be more vulnerable in their material and more honest with their audience and be less concerned about entertaining and more concerned about sharing their truth.
All right, wonderful. Well, should we call it quits on this one, Chris?
Thank you for listening. I'm Chris.
I'm Randall.
Until then, and thank you for enjoying our very serious conversation about the business of funny. Take care. Bye.
Bye.